My name is Nerdslayer, or you guys can call me Justin, and this is my save file.
What's up, gamers? Welcome to episode 13 of the Save File podcast, where, like every video game character, every gamer has an origin story to share. I'm your host, Golden Lion, and today's guest is an independent video game journalist. I was checking out his YouTube, and he's doing something out there that nobody else is doing. He has this YouTube series to where he does critical analysis for dead/dying games. It's pretty in-depth. It's good lengthy videos, but you know how it is in YouTube when there's lengthy videos, people just do it for the ads. But with his videos, it's actually full of information, in-depth analysis. You can really tell behind his work in the video that he really puts in the work to really give you the information and share. And it's pretty dope. I recommend you guys actually checking it out. The link to his YouTube will be in the description box below. Go ahead and check that out. Amongst other things, he has a podcast that he live streams on Twitch. It's called 6 Pixels Under, where it's pretty much the same thing, but he talks about the latest gaming news, and sometimes he has some credible people that come in as guests, and he comes in and they kind of talk about the latest things that goes on. But hey, I humbly and respectfully welcome to the podcast, Mr. Nerdslayer. What's up, bro?
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Of course. Hey, man, thanks for coming through, man. Seeing the amount of work from a viewer's perspective, I could tell that you put in a lot of work, and I'm pretty sure you have a whole team behind you, and there's a lot of time that you invest into it. So thank you for coming on to the show.
Yeah, actually, it's mainly just me and my editor, and
okay.
Yeah, we're the main driving force behind the channel. I would say that we're definitely community, sourced or helped, because I have people in the community who will tell me things, who will point me in a direction, who tell me their personal story of a game, and like all that stuff is helpful. But yeah, mostly it's just myself, my editor, and we do it all ourselves.
Shout out to the editor. What's your editor's name?
Tom.
Tom, just Tom.
Yeah, Tom. That's what he goes by.
Yeah,
Tom's
really.
from the UK, so he's across the pond.
Oh, nice. So it's like Tom, like what's his name? Like MySpace Tom, just Tom.
Exactly.
Nothing more. I like it. All right, man. We're gonna get right into it, dude. So, yeah, explain your first gaming experience.
So my first gaming experience would definitely. It's hard exactly to pin it down, but I would say it's either the first time that I played Zelda on the Super Nintendo, or it was the first time I played Street Fighter, because for some reason my dad had a Super Nintendo, and he wasn't the biggest gamer, but he happened to have one. It might have been my uncle's or something, but it was over at my house, and I remember just picking up the controllers and trying Super Nintendo. And I was like, the distinctive thing I remember about trying games when I was young was being really, really bad at them, but I had a lot of fun. So yeah, but I remember doing that the most. But like really playing games, I would say came when I got into like Diablo 1 on the PC, and I was like really young. I might have been 7, 8 then. So
It's usually where it starts for all of us, man.
Yeah, I was playing that young at Diablo 1 on the PC was probably my first game. Yeah.
Which Zelda game?
I think it might have been. Is it Link Awakening or
Link to the Past?
Yeah, it's one of those on the whatever one is on the
Super Nintendo? Yeah, it's that one, Link to the Past.
Okay, that's it then. But I also played the ones on Game Boy. I also played Majora's Mask, which is my favorite Zelda game, and so I like Zelda in general.
And I'm assuming when you say Street Fighter 2?
It must have been Street Fighter 2, because I think Street Fighter 1 would have been too far back.
Yeah, it's Street Fighter 2, man. Woo! Good times with that game, man. Holy crap. All right, so the first segment we're going to get into is character creation. So basically the background of your lives. So, but the first question I'd like to ask is your gamer tag. So how'd you think of Nerdslayer?
Nerdslayer is it's sort of a joke, but it's sort of realistic in a sense. It's
Okay.
So it started off actually when I was playing Guild Wars 2. I went by a tag that was X Force, which was just when I was a young kid playing Halo on the Xbox. It was like Exiled Force. I was like trying to be like the edgy kid. Like I'm exiled or something, and then it became X Force when I was playing Guild Wars 2, and then after X Force, it kind of morphed into Nerd Slayer when I was playing Overwatch actually, and
Mhm.
I was going to a tournament locally actually here in Austin. They had a DreamHack here, so I went to a DreamHack event at Overwatch, and I needed a name. So I was like, well, I want a name that sounds like it's cool. That sounds like, when someone says it out, it would sound cool. Like, when someone says a name, whenever someone scores or makes a point, they'd be like Nerd Slayer. Like I thought it would be a cool name, but then it was also growing up that I from both sides have been seen as being a part of the other side. So like the people who play sports and the jocks, if you will, right, have
Mhm.
always kind of seen me as like, okay, I'm one of them, but I'm kind of the weird nerdy kid. And then the
Yeah.
nerds were kind of like, you're kind of the weird sports kid. So like it was kind of like the in between that I am definitely a nerd. There's no buts about that. But I've been doing martial arts since I was like 5 or something like that. So it's been long time training martial arts in real life, and I think it's just like a marrying of those two things together. Nerd Slayer, Nerd Slayer.
It's pretty good. How long did it take you to think of that name?
uh, that one actually did take me a while. It's funny. It's funny you asked that because the other ones I would say just came. That's probably why they're so bad, but they came so randomly over just random years. But this one actually took time to like think of how would it sound if someone said my name versus like an announcer saying my name. Like actually was thinking about that. So
Mhm.
I like that it's Nerd Slayer, but I will say I abbreviate it a lot of the time to NS just because for my channel, since it's a lot more noir, it's a lot more like when a detective signs his name, he doesn't sign his whole name, he just signs his initials. It's kind
Yeah.
of like that, yeah.
Yeah, just
So I went kind of to NS because it would be like cool and stylistic to do that, but I'm still Nerd Slayer.
of course, of course. All right. So let's get deep. Describe your childhood.
My childhood is honestly, it's probably not very strange to people who grew up on the border of Mexico and Texas, like me.
Mhm.
But for of course, that's what we're doing here. We're talking about the story. So I'm actually Hispanic, despite the way I look, despite how
Mhm.
white I look. And so I grew up a lot of the time, spent in my childhood was in Laredo, which is right on the border of Mexico. Nuevo Laredo. Laredo is right there. I mean, back in the day, you could basically cross between the border, and there was really no like process you had to go through. So you could just go to Mexico, come back to Texas like nothing. And being on a border town, it was kind of like Mexico anyway. Even though I wasn't in Mexico most of the time, we did go, but it wasn't most of the time. So that time was spent. My dad's side is Mexican, and so they're very like, I mean, my family's Moreno, so like they're like legit like dark Hispanics.
Mhm.
For those who don't know, Moreno literally translates to dark, like the dark skinned one. So
Mhm.
I didn't get that part of the blood, but it was weird because I grew up really fair skinned and I even had blonde hair as a kid, and so it was like I people were kind of taken aback by me, just like my dad. My dad went through the same thing whenever he was young, where he had blonde hair, blue eyes, and so you get a lot of like I would say flack because you're not dark enough or because you don't seem like you're Hispanic, so people think you're white and they're just like, oh, gringo, gringo, like white boy.
Yep.
And then coming to Houston, obviously, which is where I grew up primarily, besides Laredo, it was like my neighborhood. I mean, I might have been one of the 10 or 15 like white looking people. Like it was like that Hispanic. My area was very much an Hispanic area growing up. It was ESL, so like that was always weird for me because whenever I was growing up, I didn't really want to seem like I was so smart, if that makes sense, because like I was
Yeah.
smart, but like I knew that people couldn't really understand me, so like I always was trying to make sure I was like keeping it cool. So I think that attracted me to doing things like sports and stuff like that, but naturally I was wanting to read and play games
When you
and do
said
the
that
nerdy stuff.
when you said that they didn't really understand you, what do you mean by that?
So when I was, I guess you would say in elementary school, I was, a gifted kid. I guess you would say like they were trying to put me into gifted and talented and put me in some different separate school over here, and
Okay.
I didn't want to do any of that. So like what I did and made sure to do was pretty much always be misbehaved. So I noticed that like when even if they turned in your portfolio and you had all good scores, if you had like a U on your report card, which means that you were just unruly, right? Like they wouldn't let you get into a nice gifted and talented program, or they wouldn't let you go to a place like Cornerstone or something, which is like a private academy. You know, they wouldn't let you into those places. So like
Yeah.
for me, it was like just making sure I was staying where I was by just being, you know, loud and raising amok, I guess, in school. I
Mm-hmm.
was that kid.
Oh, you were that kid.
Yeah, I was the kid trying to make everyone laugh in class, like wasting everyone's time. In hindsight,
So when did you realize you were wasting everybody's time?
it was probably honestly, it was probably like seventh, eighth grade, where it sounds like arrogant to say, but it's like sometimes you don't realize that you're that different, if that makes sense. You just think you're like everyone else, so you spend so much time thinking I'm like everyone else, I'm like everyone else, and then seventh, eighth grade came around, and kids were like, dude, like you're just waking up, taking a test, and you're doing well. Like that's not fair. Like, you know, kids were literally telling me that, and so I'm like, why? Like, you know, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I doing that? Like, and then I
Mm.
started to kind of realize, okay, well, because at home, you know, like my parents divorced when I was in middle school, so like for that point, you know, like my parents weren't really, I guess, on the best of terms. And so it was just like, you know, being like a young kid trying to like get attention basically because your home life ain't so great.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, she, as far as I can remember, pretty much she's been, or she was an alcoholic. And so like it was like my dad was always working, my mom was always, you know, glued to alcohol, glued to whatever she could, you know, abuse substance at the time. And I was alone a lot of the time. So it was just reading, reading, reading. That's all I did was read, 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 read. That's how I got smart. I don't think I'm super special or anything. It was just I read a lot and I was always on the computer and I was always looking things up and I was always keeping myself busy. And I didn't realize that as a kid. You know, I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm just living. But in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I was keeping myself busy because I didn't like this. I wanted attention because I wasn't getting attention at home. And the main reason I wasn't getting attention at home was kind of like the issues I mentioned, of course, but also like my brother and my sister were more like, I guess you would say, problematic children at home. So like they had to have my parents were focused on them a lot of the time. Whereas
Mm.
me, I was a kid that was getting A's on my report card. They're like, you're good.
You're
You're
good.
fine.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like they ignored me because I essentially was doing okay. But in reality, I wasn't really doing okay. I was just, you know, I was doing well academically, but I wasn't doing well socially or doing well by, you know, the teacher. But they didn't care about that part. So
You mentioned you have a brother and a sister. Are you the youngest or where are you?
middle child.
The
Yeah.
middle child.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's usually the person who gets the most like ignored. It's like
Yeah.
the child who's like in between, you know, like
Yeah.
somewhere. Because when you're first, it's like you get all this attention. When you're last, you still get all the attention because they focus on you. When you're kind of in between, it's like you're caught in between having
Yeah.
two kids.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely could feel that. Even back then, I could feel like, oh, but in hindsight, it's like it's not bad necessarily, but it did affect, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You mentioned your dad was Hispanic. What about your mom?
My mom was white, so my mom actually, my brother's he took some type of DNA, you know, ancestry test or whatever, and they said that his blood was mostly uh, British, Irish, and then German. So like that family is, you know, very European.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, very, very white, very fair skinned, and they're also the tall ones. So my it was always funny because I've been taller than my dad since I was like, man, I can't fifth grade, sixth grade, you know, like it's
Mm-hmm.
because I was 6 feet in sixth grade already. So like I grew fast and like so I was already at that point like 4 inches taller than my dad, and they wouldn't believe him when he would say these are my kids. Like he'd be like, because my brother is the same was the same height as me, so my dad would
Yeah.
walk around and be like, these are my kids, you know, proudly, and they'd be like, those are your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was very proud as well, so he'd be like, yeah, those are my kids, you know. And it was just always jarring because even now we're like, you know, much larger than him, so it still
Mm-hmm.
catches people kind of off guard. But yeah, no, that came from my mom's side of the family.
Nice. You mentioned something about your parents being divorced. So how'd you take that?
I would say honestly, it would have been better off if they just divorced earlier on. I think they were one of those like relationships who tried to like stay together and like I guess make sure or pretend it's all right, or I don't know, whatever you want to call that, like
Mm-hmm.
try and keep it going, right? But even as a kid looking back, it was like it wasn't really gonna work, because like my mother needed a lot of like psychological help, and I don't think people were really aware of that. Like especially back then, it wasn't like mental health is a lot more focused on these days because
Mm-hmm.
people think about it a lot. But like back then, she had borderline personality disorder, so like she was diagnosed as like somebody basically who can be a little bit bipolar. That's kind of what borderline personality is. It's a mixture of being bipolar and a mixture of like extreme down or extreme lows polarized by extreme highs. So it's similar, but it's slightly different. It takes place more in women. But anyway, we didn't know this shit obviously at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They know this much later on. But yeah, so she had to deal with that a lot. And then of course my dad was, you know, he's from a border town, so like he didn't have a lot of money. He didn't have any other resources other than just working hard. So he would have 2-3 jobs, that kind of thing. And it was just very typical border story, really, I think, for a lot of kids who had parents who just had to work a lot of the time, and then maybe a mother who wasn't necessarily around.
So what did you learn from all this?
I would say the biggest stuff I learned from all of that had been just to be self-reliant a lot of the time. I would say I think it's probably why I'm a lot less interested in like joining an outlet or joining like a media company or even doing like sponsored videos. Even is like I feel like I've been independent since I was really young. So like I credit my brother for taking care of me more when
Mm-hmm.
I was young than I do like my mother. And so like my brother was always there taking care of me. And so whenever my parents divorced and my brother was with my dad, I just carried that same thing on. Like whatever my brother did, whatever he taught me, I was kind of the same way. And now my brother, he works a job that's kind of in parallel of mine, which is like he works for a manufacturer. He sells material and construction and does really well. And being a salesman for a manufacturer is one of the better things you can do in construction, because you're not just selling to individual people, you're selling to everybody basically. So he worked his way up to that, which is what I would say is corporate, to some extent, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm the guy who's kind of just like off on my own. So like we can relate in ways, but we're very different in other ways.
Mm-hmm. When you were explaining your mother about everything that she was going through, you mentioned that she was an alcoholic. What do you mean by was?
She passed away, I think 6 or 7 years ago.
From what?
Just uh, basically her liver gave out on her, like, and for those listening, it's a pretty brutal death whenever you just abuse it past the point to where your liver can't keep up anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens towards the end is I think they call it cirrhosis. But what happens is you start getting basically cancerous cells in your liver because your liver can't reject the alcohol and all the bad toxins you've put through it. And so your liver serves a very important function where it is able to take like the nutrients from your food and from the things you drink, right, which basically keep you alive.
Mm-hmm.
But if your liver starts failing, then it's basically like you could eat and drink, but you're not going to get the resources you need from it. It's kind of like the same situation as your kidneys to some extent. And so like
Okay.
you can't really you can't get rid of the toxins, and you can't really retain energy or I guess, like, I'm butchering the science, but you can't retain like the important parts of the food and the water and the drink. So like, yeah, it was not a good life for her in her last couple of years, but I wasn't around, so I didn't experience that.
Okay. So what did you learn from her choices and leading up to what it did?
I think probably the biggest things it taught me was obviously to take care of my own mental health, to just be aware of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But also it taught me that even like a well-intentioned person can like do a lot of bad, basically, and have a lot of problems. So it's like you've always got to make sure the decisions you're making in life, and also that no matter how small it seems, like if you continue to make a mistake, sometimes after a certain point, people don't want to help you, so it's like you can't exhaust like your good relationships and relationships with people, because if you do, then they might not want to deal with you anymore. So I would say that those are probably some big things, but maybe another one would be in terms of just my addictive like personality, because that runs in the family. Like when people say alcoholism runs in the family, it technically doesn't actually run in the family. Like alcoholism isn't some gene or something that passes down and you just love alcohol. Like that's not how it works. It's more that you've got a lower threshold for like I think it's oxytocin and serotonin. So like you need more of a
Stimulant.
like exactly, you need more of a stimulant in order to get the like excitement out of it. So like I guess the layman's term or the way to describe it would just be like, if I'm playing a game and somebody else is playing a game, would have to play way more of the game to get the same amount of enjoyment that maybe somebody else could play just a little bit of time. So it's like that's kind of just like with anything I do. It always feels like I have to do a lot of it in order to enjoy it. And obviously, if that's not like controlled, it can be really negative. It could be substance abuse. It could be, you know, who knows, like crime. It could be a lot of bad things. But for me, it was just video games, reading, and I kept it mostly, you know, like under wraps. Like I controlled it mostly.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you started off on the Super Nintendo. So explain how the Super Nintendo came into your life.
Super Nintendo. I mean, I think my uncle Nick, he's been the biggest influence on my gaming. I guess I would say, because he brought the Super Nintendo in and was playing that a bit. But then my friend also had a Sega Genesis, and so like I got to go to his house and play that, which was like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and stuff. And you know, those are like classic arcade games as well. You can play those in arcade cabinets. And no, those are honestly those are some of the best games ever. Like those are 4-player co-op games. Back then, those games were all co-op. You know, you could play them with your friends, and so it was like, for me, that was really awesome that you could play games with other people. Like, so I've always been attracted, even though I started playing games by myself, I always wanted to play games with other people. So the Super Nintendo was playing games by myself, but the Sega Genesis, the PlayStation, right, which I never had, but my cousin had one. That was always kind of like a thing. Is like I didn't really have consoles until the N64. That was my first console I owned myself, and that was because my aunt got it for us. Because again, my family was, as you can probably imagine, not very wealthy. We were pretty poor, and I didn't have access to all of that stuff. But my aunt, you know, who is on my dad's side, who basically I would say is another mother figure in my life, she was like, well, you know, I'm going to give you this N64, and I had Gex and Majora's Mask and Super Smash Brothers, and of course all like the main hits on it. And N64 was my first like personal system, though, I would say.
What games did you mostly play on it?
Besides, I mean, those are I would probably say it was Smash Brothers was definitely a big hit, because we had a clubhouse in our area that we lived, and a community center, if you want to call it that. But you would play Smash Brothers there most of the time. People wanted to play Smash Brothers. But you also had what was another one that I liked a lot? Mario Kart, of course. That's another classic. That's Majora's Mask, Zelda, Ocarina of Time, of course. Those are two classics. And then and Ocarina of Time, the funny thing was I couldn't play it myself because I was too scared of like the zombie level. You know, like, there's like a level where there's like zombies. Like I was young at the time that I didn't want to play it, so one of my friends who was actually 2 grades above me, that was a common theme in my life, is my friends were much older than me, like most of the time. Like they weren't my same grade. I had friends that were the year above or the 2 years above, and he was one of those friends. So he would play and I would just watch him, basically. Because I was too afraid to play like the zombie scenes. But Majora's Mask, I don't know why I played that instead, because that game's even scarier, but I did, so whatever.
So what stood out the most for you for like Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time?
The cartridge, like the little game itself for Majora's Mask. If you look it up, it's gold. And so like when my uncle got it for me, I think he got it from like a secondhand store. I just saw this like gold, you know, and it had like the mask on it and it said Zelda. I was like, okay, this is cool. Yeah. Literally that simple. It was gold. Like I was like, okay, that's the coolest thing ever.
Another cartridge that's like that is Pokemon Stadium 2, where it's have you seen that one?
I have, actually. My cousin had that. Yeah,
it's the gold. It's gold one side and silver on the other side. It's actually really freaking dope.
There's that, and then there's a couple army games that were green, and I had one of those as well. One of them was like you played with tanks, or you played as a tank, or something like that.
Yeah, it's called Battle Tanks.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and that one was gold as well. I had that one.
Dude, oh damn, flashback. Yeah, dude, definitely For like that's how we relate. Is that N64 is definitely catalyst for my gaming experience. Yeah, whole lot of games. Donkey Kong 64 was my shit, dude. I loved it. You mentioned martial arts. How'd that get involved?
I think it was like my dad, he truly grew up on the border. So like for him, whatever I experienced as a kid was much like more, it was much less than what he experienced. So like, if people can't read between the lines, like if you're not a certain color, sometimes people don't like you. And even if you are the same race as a certain group, but even they can see you like, and this is common in Hispanic culture for those who know, like you have dark Hispanics, lighter Hispanics, and sometimes they don't like each other. So it's not as just like, oh, you're Hispanic, so everyone loves each other. It's like in Cuba, for example, you have very dark Hispanics, but then you could have fair skinned Hispanics, and sometimes they just don't like each other for whatever reason. And yeah, I obviously was fair skinned, and my dad was fair skinned, so he got whatever I had much worse. But I think it was just like he wanted to have us equipped, like he didn't want us to go through what he went through, which is like no one put him in martial arts, no one put him in anything like that. He just had to like survive basically. And he's told me multiple times he was jumped. I mean, he couldn't even count how many times he told me. Like he's been in so many fights growing up. He was just like, I don't want you guys to have to deal with that. So I actually want y'all to learn, that way you can defend yourself. So it was like pretty much no choice. Like from day one, as young as I can remember, 4 or 5, we were on the mats. We started off with Taekwondo for a little bit. We went back to karate up to like green belt, maybe purple belt. And then we went back to Taekwondo because we have found a local Korean instructor who had just came from Korea, and
nice.
We went with him all the way up to brown belt. My brother nearly got his black belt, stopped right before, but that was around like age 14 or so. And then sports kind of came in, and sports took over instead of martial arts for at least 5 or 6 years for me. But then I came back to it, Muay Thai later on, now jiu-jitsu mostly that I do. But yeah, so since I was young, we were driving every single weekend to go to a different tournament, to a different competition. So we've been competing since I can remember, and we've been sparring and fighting since I can remember. So it's at this point, it's the Nerd Slayer thing is very apt for me because it's, as far as I can remember, it's been one-on-one.
Yeah. Did you like competing?
No, actually, I didn't. And that's like, yeah, that's the thing is like when I talk about my young martial art life, honestly, it for me it was a lot of like pulling hair, because for some reason I just did not want to go. And I think it was probably because like parents, like when they force you to do something, sometimes you almost like rebel the other way, because you're just like, I don't want to be doing that, I just want to be playing games. Like
yeah,
I don't want kids to be punching me and kicking me. Like I'd rather just go play games. And because there'd be times when we were younger, because we grew very quickly, they couldn't place us against young kids anymore. So like they would start putting us against older kids, 16-year-olds, 17-year-old, 18 grown men, like that was happening early on when we were 13, 14 already. So like my brother, even when he was 15, went against grown men in competition. So it was like, we were used to that, but it was like, not me saying I was used to it doesn't mean that it was necessarily fun. Cause like I remember times being a kid where I would just get hit in the stomach, and we didn't have pads then. And it was just, you'd just be crying. You'd just be like, that hurt. But the other person, or my dad, would be looking at me on the side like, all right, you got to get back up. Like, you got to keep going kind of thing. And you're just like, yeah, this is not the most fun thing. But the form, or kata, they call it, where it's like you see people going here and there. Like, that's more of what I enjoyed as a kid, I think, because it was more performative. It's more like art. But the sparring part was, I think the main reason sparring was hard for me was just like, my brother was really, really good, and not just good, but he was like the best in our region. Like when we had regionals, my brother always won. Like,
wow.
If he had gone to nationals, he would have been a winner. Basically, he would have won a tournament at the national level, and he maybe could have even qualified to go to the Olympics. Like my brother was, when he was young, like he was winning gold in everything. So like sparring against him was always like it was weird, because in my head I'm thinking I'm doing so bad because I'm losing, but in reality, watching him compete against me and compete against other people, I was actually doing good, but I didn't realize that,
Oh, okay. It's a good self-reflection.
It's your brother, so you're like, I'm going with my brother, but my brother's kicking my ass. But then you look back and you're like, well, my brother was kicking everybody's ass, so like, it doesn't really matter that I was the one that was getting the brunt of it early on. But that, for my mind, I couldn't make that assessment. I couldn't realize, oh, I'm actually good. So I didn't believe in myself when I was younger doing martial arts a lot of the time, and so like I don't think it was as fun for me, but it was fun later on, and it has been fun competing now, like now that I'm older and more mature and stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, with that 5-year gap, what made you come back to martial arts, Muay Thai?
I think it was, honestly, I've been watching UFC since I was 11, so I was always around it, like I've been to live events. We have friends that my uncle works with who fought for Bellator and stuff. So like they basically, like professional organizations, I should say, for people who don't know the names. But so I had been around it. And so it was almost like it's almost like I didn't have a choice. Like I couldn't get away from it. It was just always there. Every time I watched a fight, I was like, man, I miss kicking. I miss punching. I miss doing all these things that I was good at. And I just stopped doing it basically. And I never really, like, as funny as it sounds, I had fun playing sports, but it was more like other people wanted me to play sports because I'm the big kid. I'm 6'5". Exactly. They're like, hey, come play sports. I was more like, like I actually wanted to just do martial arts, but just the performative aspects of it more so early on. And it was just like, well, I still have this like paranoid feeling, that came from just growing up, which now I know is PTSD, right? Coming from a traumatic childhood. But I was always afraid I was going to get jumped or beat up. So it was like that 5-year gap. I still felt a lot of those feelings, and I was like, okay, this isn't going away. So like, I think if I'm going to deal with this stuff, I have to face it head on, basically, which is like getting back into it. And so when I got back into Muay Thai, that might have been like, even versus like my time now spent in jiu-jitsu, which I train 6 times a week. That might have been the hardest time I've ever had starting, because it was like that period of time off, which wasn't nearly as bad, but it actually was the fact that I had gotten bigger weight wise. And so like it felt like I could move like I was a young kid, but then I was like 100 pounds heavier. And I'm not even saying like 100 pounds like I was like obese or something, but it was just like even the extra weight for me was like, okay, I need to actually approach this differently. I'm not like this small kid. I can't be doing this crazy moves anymore, because I would do those crazy moves and I'd be getting myself hurt. And I'd be like, yeah, like big guy like me, even people would tell me like, you shouldn't be, like, you're a big guy, you shouldn't be doing like that kind of move or that kind of move. And I still do some of those kind of moves, but at the same time, it was like, yeah, I need to be more careful. And Muay Thai is all about conditioning your body. So it's like your shins,
your elbows,
your elbows, exactly, your knees. Even your knees are bruised all the time, your elbows are bruised all the time. So it's like that one's a very brutal hardening of your body. But I'm glad I went through the process, because now my shins don't feel a whole lot, but that's a good thing for me. And a bad thing for other people,
of course.
But yeah, so that got me back into Muay Thai. But then when I was doing Muay Thai, what kind of got me away from it actually was I was in my garage. And I know there's a meme, the in my garage meme, but this time I was really just in my garage, and it was slick concrete, and I just fell. I hit my head, and I had never been concussed in martial arts before. I've been hit and dropped and hurt and like all those things, but like I'd never been really just concussed. And that was my first time really getting concussed like that. Like I had been hit in football and had minor concussions, but never like that, because I did play 7 years of football, so it was a long time of football, but I never really had one where you just were out. And this one was so bad that it was like whiplash, and I could feel my face crunching when I hit the concrete. Like it messed me up so bad that I didn't recover immediately from it. And so like I had post-concussion syndrome after that. And usually that happens with people who have PTSD, by the way, is their brain can't recover as fast whenever it gets a traumatic injury. So I had that happen to me in the middle of all of that, in the midst of all of that. So even though I was going to a gym that was rated the best gym in Texas for Muay Thai, whenever I'd go in there and start sparring again, I could still feel it, like when people would hit me, I could feel like the jolting, and it was just like, okay, yeah, so I need to do something about this, like, because this is not good. It was getting into the fact that I couldn't even play games for prolonged periods of time, because I'd be staring at the screen playing, and I would just get migraines, not just headaches, but like migraines, to the point to where I had to turn the lights off and everything was too sensitive, and you could see sounds and shit. Like, you know, it would really mess with you. Like you could see lights and then you feel like you could hear things. Like it totally messes with your perception of things. And so it was like after driving home one day, I'm like migrained out of my mind. I'm barely making it home. And I'm honestly afraid I'm even going to make it home. And I was like, yeah, okay. I can't keep doing that. I need to find something to like fix this. And so like the only thing I found, honestly, and it was good timing for me, was, you know, legalization of CBD in Texas. Hemp came
Mhm.
at like a perfect time for me, because without any of that stuff, I don't think I would have ever overcame my migraines, which I don't have migraines anymore. That's what I attest it to, basically,
Mhm.
is medication.
Mhm.
But besides that, yeah, no, I would probably say that maybe being a little bit more conscious of my health helps as well. But then I just was trying jujitsu when I came to Austin 2 years ago for the first time. I've never really tried it before. And immediately I was just like, okay, this is awesome. And this is cool because I'm not getting hit in the head all the time. And I'm not
Mhm.
getting punched and kicked all the time. So
And you're
I was
tall
like,
as
oh,
fuck, so you have all that leverage.
yeah. And it's like, why not learn this, which is like a safe, controlled way to subdue somebody versus like, you know, Muay Thai is very much
Just
like you're just going to be brutal to somebody, you know? So
yeah.
it's like, I also didn't have much of a ground game. You know, for people who watch MMA, like if I was put on my back, I didn't have any experience there, because in football, I was never going to get put on my back, right? Like that was what I was resisting. I played tight end. So I was
Mm.
never trying to be put on my back
Mhm.
at all costs. But then it was like, you start doing jujitsu, which is mostly, for those who don't know, a ground art. It's the ground portion of judo, and judo is the older art, and then it became jujitsu, and now it's a smaller. They call it niwaza, as the Japanese word for like the ground fighting of jujitsu. That's the
Mm.
part that jujitsu focuses on, is the ground fighting. So you have to get good at being on your back, and it's like at first it's very unnatural. People get on top of you and they're holding you down, and you feel claustrophobic, and you want to breathe, and like you're a little bit like worried because I don't have the ability to get away from somebody, which is what I'm used to doing when I'm on my feet, because I'm used
Mhm.
to bouncing around and being able to have like distance with my kicks or something, right? On the ground, it's like all that range advantage is much more, you know, compact. Like you got to learn how to use leverage, and you got to learn how to just not use all your strength and not, you know, get yourself super tired. So once I experienced that, I realized how much I didn't know, and so I was like, oh yeah, I have to dedicate myself to this.
Nice. So, I mean, what got you to do jujitsu from Muay Thai?
I think it was so luckily for me, a place here that teaches Muay Thai, aka their main instructor, the guy who owns the gym, is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's a black belt under a another black belt here, Paulo Coelho, who's my current teacher, who is the lead instructor of a gym here in Austin, Gracie Humaita, which is based on Hoyler Gracie, you know, lineage, and he's a Hoyler Gracie black belt. So I had heard, you know, oh, so he has this tie to jiu-jitsu, and so I was like, and I asked him about it. I asked the coach about it. I was like, so should I try, like, what do you think? Like, should I try out jiu-jitsu? And he's like, yeah, of course, try it out. It'll be awesome. You'll love it. And so I came over, and it was actually with my girlfriend. I went with my girlfriend, and we both signed up at the same time. And she had been looking to get into a martial art as well, and she went even heavier into it immediately than I did. And I think it was partly because I was still cross training at the time. I was still doing Muay Thai and jiu-jitsu. So like I mean, at that point, I have a pro fighter schedule where I'm working out two different, you know, programs every day practically. And I was so tired. It was just like, I was like, all right, what am I doing here? Like, I'm not a
Mhm.
pro. I'm not going to be a pro. So I was like, I need to make a choice right now, which one I really want to focus on. And I actually didn't have a choice. I got injured. My knee got injured. And so it was like, I wasn't able to jump around as much anymore and kick for a while. I mean, like 3 months. And so it was like during that time, that's when I really got into jujitsu, because I was just hurt basically, and I couldn't really stand up as effectively, and I didn't want to get hit in my knee. That was for sure.
Mhm.
I didn't want to get kicked there. So it was like, I need to do this in the meantime. And then during that time, I just obviously really enjoyed it and kind of fell in love with it. So
You still do it?
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
You
right
you,
now
you plan on competing?
I've competed before, actually, on
Okay.
my Instagram. You guys could see one of my competitions. But I have a competition coming up in like about a month or two. It's a round robin in March.
Nice. What belt are you in jujitsu?
Right now I'm a 4 stripe white belt. So I'm like right before I'm going to get my blue belt.
How long will it take to get a black belt?
In total, I think it kind of depends, but anywhere from like, I would say for most people, it's going to be about 7 to 10 years.
That's a long. That's some commitment right there, dude. Holy crap.
Yeah, I say most people because unless you're crazy like me and you can come like 5 times a week, maybe it'll be faster for you. But most people are going to take 7 to 10 years, long time, because they're maybe only going 2 or 3 times a week, which is a lot in the big scheme of things, but not as much as other people who will just dedicate their life to it. Like go even more than I do. So there's people at our gym who go twice a day. So like, there's always levels.
Of course, yeah. Well, good luck to your tournament, man. Looking forward to that. Make sure you post some stuff on your socials. I'll be looking forward to see the results.
I'm trying to bring the tripod out, trying to get some more stuff recorded. That's the goal, because I want to show my audience more of that side of me, because they just kind of know the video game side of me, which is a big side of me for sure. I play my video games all the time, but it's also this other part of me that, for me, keeps me healthy and keeps my mind right.
Well, again, man, good luck to you in that. So you mentioned N64. You played that a lot. How'd you go from that to playing Diablo 1 on PC?
So I think it was we had some kind of old, just janky computer, and it was back. My parents were together at this point, and we would just get those little, DVDs or CDs where I would like AOL for a month, or you remember those? Like,
oh yeah,
it was like AOL for 7 days or whatever. Like, so I would just keep getting those CDs and keep getting AOL or dial-up internet and just making a new account each time. And so during that time, I'm just playing whatever I could play, which the only 2 games I had because of my grandpa basically were StarCraft, which I was big into, and then Diablo, which I was big into. But I also found out that other games existed online. And so it was like after Diablo, which was just watching my grandpa play these games, watching other people play these games, I was like, okay, like I want to try these games. And so it was the curiosity. It was also the fact that Diablo looked kind of scary to me. So it was like, I've always been that person who likes to push like how, scary something is to see like if I could overcome it. Right. So I was like, I kind of want to see what it is, but I'm pretty scared by it. For the longest time, I wouldn't even walk into the first zone. Like, how you're on the front, you start in the front in the game and you're talking to this like priest who's like dying or something like that. And he tells you about like Diablo, like the devil, and you go into like the game, and that's where you first start the game. I wouldn't even go in at first. Like I was just like, pretty scared. I don't know if I want to go in. I was like the protagonist character who's like, I don't know about this, guys. But that was definitely always me. But after Diablo, which I didn't play that game super heavily, the game that I played heavily on PC was definitely StarCraft. But what got me into, MMOs, which are my favorite genre of video game, was actually around that same time I discovered a game. A friend told me about it. It was a social avatar game. The game was Habbo Hotel. And that game back there was pretty big, but it was like kind of like Second Life, but like much shorter, and like your avatars were not nearly as realistic, if you will. And I got into that game, and I must have been like, that was 2000. So if it's 2020 now, yeah, I was like 7 or 8 when I played that for the first time. So that was like a long time ago. But that game was just a chat site, basically. You had an avatar, you could walk around in the game, you could interact and trade stuff, kind of like a regular, MMO, but it was more so you just talk to people. It was a social game. So that's all I did, just like talk to people online. And that honestly was probably what I spent the most of my childhood at that time doing, was just talking to people online. And most importantly, the server that I played on was in the UK. So there wasn't a US server originally in this game. So I was playing on a UK server at like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all throughout that whole time, talking to people from across the pond. So I've always been a bit of a weird American, I think, because of that. Like I grew up talking to people from other countries. And so I was always, wondering what's out there in the world, I guess.
I like that, how you said weird American. That's funny. What games you play nowadays?
These days, Guild Wars 2, I started playing that because I'm going to be doing a review on that, since I just did a review on WoW Classic, which is coming out this weekend. So Guild Wars 2 right now, and then I also would say my Switch. I love playing my Switch. I'm still a Zelda fan. I'm still a Nintendo fan. It never went anywhere.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I've still got Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, Smash Brothers. You know, all the classic Mario Kart, Mario Party,
Mm-hmm.
all the great Mario games. But also Octopath Traveler on the Switch, JRPGs on the Switch. So yeah, those are the games I've been playing the most right now. I'm also trying to look into getting Kakarot as well, that new
The new
action
Dragon Ball Z.
RPG,
Yeah.
Dragon Ball Z game, which reminds me of that Gohan or the
It's
not
the
Gohan
first
game.
season.
What's the game on the Game Boy? It was like something of Goku. Was it
Son of Goku?
was it Son of was that the Game
yeah,
Boy game?
I
I
think.
think it was.
I mean, it makes sense though. Son of Goku.
I'm
'Cause it's
pretty
talking
sure
about
that's the name
Gohan.
of the game.
Yeah.
Someone
Yeah.
could fact check that, but yeah,
Yeah,
my,
for sure.
my that was one of my favorite Game Boy games because you could fly around on a little cloud and everything. I remember doing that, and so exactly. And so I was always a big Dragon Ball Z fan, which is another thing that I liked martial arts. By the way, was
Makes
Dragon Ball
sense.
Z. Honestly, like people take it for granted, but it's funny that it's actually right now in the UFC. There's a champion in the middleweight division, Israel Adesanya, and even he's said himself, Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, are the reasons like he got into martial arts. So it's like even a champion at the highest level has credited like anime for
Yeah.
getting involved. And
It's
I
powerful.
know a lot of people personally who tell me like, "Oh, anime, man. That's why I started doing martial arts."
Yeah, hell yeah, it makes sense. So how'd you get into your YouTube? How'd that all start?
The YouTube one was like was interesting because I would say I probably had been making YouTube videos since I was like 13. So like a long time I made YouTube videos. And I think again, that's one of those things where it's like people hear or think overnight success. They just see like what you've been working on in the more recent sense. But like I had many other channels. I just never really told people about them. And they were always like such small scale videos where it was my friends or like the community was watching it, and they were always silly kind of meme videos, or maybe I just do gameplays and some little montages. I made montages and stuff, but basically nobody watched it. No one really was watching it. And because I was young and I didn't have any role models telling me to keep at that, I would always quit because I was always like, oh, I'm not good enough, you know. And my computer, you know, being again a kid who didn't have a lot of money, my computer was like a compact Presario that I just like stuck some other graphics card inside of. So like it wasn't good enough to really run games and record. Whenever I would play games like Warhammer Online,
Mhm.
I had like 15 or 20 FPS. So like if for people who play
damn.
PC games, you can imagine like I was slideshowing every time I was playing. And so like that was most of my like PC career early on, was just playing shit like, you know, computer. Like, and so when I went from that to getting a new computer that I bought for myself, basically after working since I was like 16 to like 18, 19, I bought a computer myself piece by piece. Once I put that thing together, everything changed. It was just like, now I could actually play games, you know, like,
Mhm.
and I started getting really good at them quickly. And I think it was because now I had a computer that could run the games. And so I wasn't just like held back by my like PC or held back by my internet, because I would always steal Wi-Fi from like my neighbor or something like that. Like, and that's true. And that's a true story. When I played Warhammer, is I had 100 kilobytes download. That's what my speed was. And it was because I was stealing the internet from somebody that was next door. So like,
Mhm.
but that was fast enough to play online games. So I don't know how, but it was like I was actually able to play Warhammer online. And sure, I had high latency, I'm sure, but
Mhm.
I could still play the game even with my 20 FPS. So I was really like slumming it for a while. But then once I got a computer, I started making videos again. And that time is when I was getting into Overwatch and getting into Guild Wars 2. And I built a little bit of a fan base back then, maybe like 5,000 subscribers, right? Like still not much, but it was something for me like at the time. And so I, again, being the perfectionist that I am, was like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. So I kept stopping and stopping and stopping. And eventually it got to the point to where, you know, about 2.5 years ago, I was talking to my girlfriend actually, and she just told me, she's like, well, you know, why don't you make videos for yourself? Like just make a video you would like, right? And I was like, huh, like obviously in my head, I'm like, that seems like not realistic, right? Like, of course I'm gonna, but then at first, I'm like, okay, maybe. And then I was playing Star Wars Galaxies on an emulator, actually on a private server, and it's one of my favorite MMOs ever. And so when I was playing it, she was just watching me like talk about it and how passionate I was, and she was like, why did this game fail? And when it was just like that simple question, that's how I created the series. Basically, she asked me, how did Star Wars Galaxies fail? Like, why did this game like not, be this, and then all of a sudden it's this? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, and I told her, I was like, that's actually a really good question. I don't know. And so I had to go back retroactively, figure that all out. And it was like being a detective. I had the clues. I was putting them up on the wall. I was like, rubber band to here, like yarn to here. Like I was trying
Oh,
to
damn.
connect
Okay.
everything to see. Yeah, like I was really trying to figure out, was it what people said the reason was, right? Or were there other things? Was it some secret thing? And going through that whole process, which took me like 2 months on the first video, I edited that one myself, did the voiceover myself, and it was just like so poorly done in terms of like its quality production. Like if someone goes back and watches my old videos, they're really poorly like produced. Like you can hear shh, and like the mic, like all the background sounds. Like it's just, for me, it was like pretty bad. But that video within a month blew up to 100K views, and so it was like after that video, right out the gate, pretty much I was faced with, crap, now people want more of these, and like I don't know if I can keep making these, because 2 months and some change to make one of these, is that really a career? Like it isn't a career. 100K views on one video isn't a career yet. So
Mm-hmm.
I was working my construction job, project management, cost estimation mixed together, and at the same time basically. And so I would do that, and then I would come home, and then I would just work on my videos. And so I was basically working 2 jobs for a while, and it was good, like, because it helped me get started on YouTube without being so critical. Because if I would have just like not had a job and then try to be a YouTuber, honestly, I think that's really difficult to do, because like you gotta pay for your food, you gotta pay for your rent, like, like
Mm-hmm.
unless someone can pay for you, like I didn't have that luxury, so like I had to pay it all myself. So that is a big reason why a lot of people don't get started in their 20s, is because the costs, it's too expensive for them to live, so it's hard for them to take time away from their work to go work on their passion, their hobby. And so for me, it was just like, I'm gonna get it in no matter how, like no matter how hard it is, even if it's late at night, it's 3 a.m., right? Like I'm gonna find a way to like fit it in. And so after that initial Galaxies video, then it was just like another video, and it was just from there on, I could tell, I was like, okay, I have something here. Like people aren't used to this. And
Mm-hmm.
also I realized, for the longest time I saw myself as a pretty big failure, because I spent, now it's been like 19 years playing MMOs. I spent all that time playing these games, but I never did anything with it. So from in
Mm-hmm.
my head, it had to become like a negative thing. Like it was like, I'm a loser, like I spent all that time doing this shit for nothing. Like that's what I was thinking in my head. But then after making those videos and people saying, hey, I want to hear your opinion about this game, like the way you put this made a lot of sense. Like, can you explain this, and that? And then I was like, huh, people actually want to listen to me, like talk about this stuff. Like in my head, I was like, I thought people just ignored this kind of stuff. Like nobody wanted to listen to this, especially even back then. I was like, definitely nobody wanted to listen to it whenever I was playing those games. But obviously people did want to listen to it, and they kept telling me to make more and more. And so after a while, I was like, okay, well, I'm glad I didn't waste 19 years of my life playing these games. I can actually find a way to leverage it and to create a career. So that's how I got started, basically.
I did was it 6 Pixels Under?
Mm-hmm.
How'd that start?
I started my podcast primarily because I wanted to make some sort of initiative to get onto Twitch. And I think it was because like it was easy for me to just like make a podcast on YouTube, I think, because that was my audience. But I've always been attracted to Twitch as a platform. To me, it's a lot more like personal. Like you can talk to people, you can talk to your people who follow you, like you chat with people. There's a lot more interactivity.
Mm-hmm.
There's also like the whole subculture, emotes and all that. Like I like all of that stuff because I grew up on the internet as well. So it's like the whole memes and stuff like that is very at home with me. So it's like I like that, but I also like the fact that Google is one super conglomerate, Amazon's another. At least I'm in the pocket of 2 of them instead of just one of them. Like if I was just in Google's pocket, then it'd be like, what if they just terminated my channel? Then my complete career would be over. So it was like,
yeah, it makes sense.
I wanted to slowly start branching into Twitch. And yesterday, for example, I was streaming Guild Wars 2, which I don't normally stream games because for me, it's pretty exhausting to stream games. Like play the game, to be trying to explain the game, and then also people are talking to you at the same time and you're trying to talk to them at the same time. It's like it's easy for people to think, and again, this is coming from someone who works out 5-6 times a week, so like I'm very physically active. This is harder for me. Like streaming is harder for me than working out is. Like but
That's
maybe that's because
interesting.
I'm a lot more used to it. But it's just like it takes a lot of mental energy from me whenever I stream. And so, like yesterday, I got a host from one of the top Guild Wars 2 streamers. So I had 150 people watching me. My first day streaming Guild Wars 2 in like who knows how long. So I was like, oh man, like, and I was actually about to go to class too. So like, I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to like bang out 4 or 5 hours right now and then go straight to jujitsu, which is what I did. I got off the stream and I went right to jujitsu, and it's like, it's definitely like challenging to stream, but Six Pixels Under, the podcast for me was just, it was the way to get myself streaming and streaming regularly, because I wanted the opportunity to talk to people about my other videos, right? To talk about maybe things I missed in my videos, things that I wanted to highlight that I messed up on maybe, and just talk more personally with my audience. And so that's kind of what it's been for me so far. But we also just recently changed the format of the podcast, so it's a lot more condensed, and it's also a lot more interactive with the chat. So if you've noticed any of the recent episodes, I bring people on and even people who are viewers, they have a question or they want to talk about a certain topic, and it's a lot more like a round table a lot of the time now. Like we have other people come on, we talk about like, what do you think of this game, what do you think of this game, what do you think of this idea, versus like just me.
Mm-hmm.
And that so that's where I'm going right now with it. But yeah, that's how it started.
So, what's your future plans for your brand?
I want to make a production studio. So that's my number one thing is I want to turn my channel into a production studio, because I want to turn it into an outlet, isn't my own outlet. And since I already have another content creator right now working in silent and in secret, I should say, he's working on another series that I kind of came up with, but I handed it off to him. And he's a bright guy. He knows how to write, and he's also got a good voice for it, a better voice than I do for that kind of video, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot more, that new series, I've talked about it a little bit before, but it's a series about video game terminology. They're shorter videos, 10 minutes and less. And basically the purpose of the video is you take a term and you explain it, how it came to be, like who coined the term, how it's used currently, and then maybe what the term could mean going forward. So it could be anything like FPS. It could be something like game engine,
Mm-hmm.
that term. It could, it could be broad. It could be very specific. So it's a lot more flexible than my series. Death of a Game is just about multiplayer games, because it's kind of hard for a single player game to die. You can play it whenever you want. Like right now, I can hop on Majora's Mask and play by myself. Like the game's not dead, right? No one's playing online. Like it doesn't have that online component. But an online multiplayer game, the servers can actually be brought down, right? Like a game can be like killed essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit different. But this series is kind of a bit more of a bridge to the more general audience, I would say, versus my series is a lot more niche. So we have rough draft for it already. Term Travel is the name of the series, and we have the rough draft. We have all the art done, the music, the new intros done already. It's just been a slow process because I've been paying the artist before we put it out, of course, because I pay my artists and I own my music and my art. But also, it's just been a process to, how do you introduce a new content creator? Like that's still going to be, how are people going to react? Are they going to be like, how come this isn't you? And things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But I think ultimately, if we do it right, people will be okay with it, because the concept is, me making a production studio means that every new content creator I bring on is a new detective, basically. Like that's like the lore of the channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is every new content creator is their own kind of detective. And so like I'm a very particular kind of detective. My character is NS. I'm Nerd Slayer. It's kind of like a bit of a pun. So my character, who you see with the fedora and the suit, and the person who's in my intro, like that's NS. I'm personally Nerd Slayer, just because it's weird when people call me NS versus it's weird when you call the detective Nerd Slayer, right? But it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense the other way around. And the other detective, his name's not public yet, but he's more like Doctor Who. Like if you want to compare him to my character, he's more kind of zany, uses a lot of technology, time travels, like, so it's like I'm going with almost like comic book characters. A new character is created each time I bring a new content creator on. So that's what I'm going for. Very comic book-esque, but definitely going to be like that character is not going to seem noir. It's not going to be black and white. That character is going to be very colorful and very like bombastic. Whereas, my character is black and white.
Makes sense, man. Looking forward to that. That sounds pretty interesting. Hell yeah. Well, that's the character creation. So thanks for sharing all that. It's a pretty interesting story you got there, man. It's awesome. So the next part we're gonna get into is attributes. So I'm gonna name off some characteristic traits, and you rate yourself from 1 to 5. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Grit.
Definitely a 5. I've been through a lot.
I normally ask why, but I think you. Is there anything in particular you didn't mention when you mean you went through a lot?
No, I mean, I think anyone who's done lifelong martial arts where you've competed, I think you're pretty tough, like on average. So like, because it's one thing to do martial arts for like a year or two or whatever else, and and even do it for a number of years, but you never actually spar, you never actually like simulate a fight, or you never actually get into a fight. It's a little bit different. But once you actually compete, you kind of learn that if you're not tough, you're basically going to quit. Like the first thing you're going to think whenever you're tired and you're in the moment, and I've been there before, I've thought about quitting. Everyone thinks about quitting. Just because I don't think about it doesn't mean, or just because I didn't quit didn't mean I didn't think about it. Like I've had a match before, even one last year, where I was so spent at the very end that I thought to myself, like, man, right now, honestly, if I just let him like kind of take my back, like honestly, this would be over, like pretty, I'm tired, like. But then it's like those thoughts, where for me grit comes in is, you're like, you know what, like, no, I'm just gonna try anyway. Like, come on, I'm not done yet. Like, I've got a little bit left in me. And then it's like next thing you know, you're surprised because you surprise yourself sometimes how much you think you're capable of. You can go into like that little next gear, I guess I would say.
Yeah, there's a good quote out there that says, "People don't know how strong they are until they have to be strong."
Yeah, exactly.
Curiosity.
Man, curiosity might be my favorite attribute, but I don't know if it's my best necessarily. Like I think at one point it might have been, like when I was a kid, it probably was a 5+++. But like these days, I'd say it's probably a lot more like humble. It's probably like on 3.5 or something like that, just because my interests have shrunk a lot, but not because I'm not interested in learning, but because I'm trying to specialize more. So it's like that naturally happens. Like you look at a scientist, and there's no scientist who's a scientist in 17 different fields, right? Like they're just a scientist in their field. So like I see it as like martial arts and gaming are kind of my fields. So those are the things that I'm the most interested in, and those are the things that I spend all my energy learning about. I don't learn as many other new things as much. So I would probably say my score has dropped since I was a kid.
Social intelligence.
Social intelligence. That's definitely high for me. I mean, MMOs are my favorite game, so I have to give myself a 5.
But why though? Why you feel like MMO is an influence of your social intelligence?
I think, well, especially old school MMOs, like if you're going to get by in those kind of games, you have to be social. Like there's no way you can play by yourself. Like you can try to play by yourself, but you won't really get by. And so like I was playing MMOs when I was a child. So like a lot of the adults I was playing with thought I was an adult as well, or they thought I was 18. So I would join a guild when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, get in voice comms, and my balls were already dropped. So people thought I was a grown man. So I'd be talking to people, I'd be like, hey guys, I'm still some dumb little kid, right?
Yeah.
In reality, I'm a dumb kid, but I never talked that much. So that way I wouldn't have to, but I talk a lot in game, but in voice, I just say a couple of things, so I could kind of not blow my cover. But I remember I was in one particular guild, and it was a roleplay guild. You had to have an application to join. We were role-playing stormtroopers. Yeah, no, it was serious. Like they made you apply. Like the guy, long story short, but the guy worked at NASA, and it was kind of a secret. But he was in Houston, and he worked at NASA. So he was a smart guy, but he kind of kept that under wraps anyway. He was really smart, and he was smart enough to see through my bullshit. So one time I'm talking to him, he's like, "So tell me, how old are you really?" And I was like, and at the time I was 13. I'm like, I'm 18. He's like, come on, I know you're not 18. You don't have to lie anymore. You're already in the guild. And I was like, I'm 13. He's like, I knew it. So going back then, it was like, I mean, yeah, that guy was smart and he caught me, but a lot of the time people didn't know I was just a little kid. And I think it was because in order to get by in those games, you had to be kind of mature. Otherwise people would just kind of ignore you, right? They wouldn't want to work with you. They wouldn't want to play with you. And since you need to play with other players, it just made me have to be socially intelligent to be like, all right, well, I can't say like little kid shit right now, so let me try and be more mature and
It makes
and
sense.
not out myself.
Yeah. Gratitude.
I'm going to assume it's like also applying it to somebody else or something like that. Um, but maybe even for myself, I'd rate myself probably pretty low, like a 3, like maybe a 2 something, 2.5 or a 3.
Why?
I think primarily, I don't really take a lot of time to give myself pats on the back, and I don't think I take compliments the best, because like the way I explain it is my ego. I had to build up my ego because I didn't have anybody else helping me with my ego when I was young. Like I didn't have a lot of people saying, "Oh, you can do this, you can do this."
Mm-hmm.
So I had to build up this chip on my shoulder. And they say like sometimes when you build up a chip on your shoulder since you were a kid, it kind of never really goes away. And I still feel like that sometimes where I'm like, somebody will compliment me and I'm kind of just like, yeah, but I kind of already knew that. And it sounds arrogant, but it's like someone's like, "Oh, you did a good job." And it's like, yeah, I know because I've been trying my best. So like I know I did a good job because I'm trying to do my best. So it's like I feel like sometimes I'm not that great at taking a compliment. I'm not good at being grateful for certain things because sometimes it doesn't matter what you think when somebody compliments you, right? It's more like they're trying to let you know, hey, what I think of you. So it's like I can say, "Oh, that's cool," but it doesn't matter because that person just wants to let me know how they feel or how they think. So it's like that's something that I would say I'm actively getting better at.
Loyalty.
Man, I'd have to be maxed out there. I'm loyal to a fault. I mean, I don't have a lot of friends. Like, I don't have a lot of close friends. I can count them on my hands, right? Like maybe 5 or 6 close friends. And that's not something that you really should brag about per se. I mean, maybe if you want a lot of friends, get a lot of friends. If you don't want a lot of friends, it's up to you personally. But I would say for me, loyalty has become kind of like a bit of a crutch because when you're afraid of putting yourself out there or you don't trust people that much, you're a lot more loyal to the people you do trust. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd say because I don't have that much trust to people, I'm very, very loyal because the people that I do trust, I trust like pretty much with everything. So basically like loyalty is cool to talk about, and can be a positive thing. But in my case, I think it's more of like a consequence of a negative thing that is kind of positive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Confidence.
Hmm. Confidence is a hard one because like I feel like that is always up and down. Like it depends on what time I'm making my video. Like if it's the start of my video, I'm like 5, right? I'm like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm gonna. I know, like, but then it's like midway through, I'm like a 3, and I'm like, I don't know, like I need to work on this. I need to work on this. When it's the end of my video, I'm like honestly a 1, almost like a -1 sometimes. Like I become my worst critic, but almost in the sense of where it's like I'm getting myself prepared for whatever possible negative, stuff that could come from my video coming out. So it's like I'm railing on myself first. I'm like, oh well, this sucks. Like I don't like this, and I've become like really harsh on myself. But I think it's like I've been talking to other like people who do YouTube videos or other artists, and they usually say it's like right before you're about to launch your kind of like art or your project, you're really critical because you've used so much energy, so you kind of don't have as much energy for it anymore, and your emotional I guess like conditioning and your mental conditioning and all of that was at a different place when you started,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're more like worn down, you're tired, you're kind of. And so a lot of the time for me, by the end of a video cycle, like right before I'm about to put it out, like my classic WoW review hasn't come out yet, but it's coming out soon. I'm pretty insecure about that right now, like personally. Like if I can admit, like right now I'm feeling like, oh man, it's my first MMO review, and it's like one that people are going to give me a lot of shit on. I know it. And so it's like you feel like that kind of like anticipation sometimes, anxiety and whatever else. So it really depends on a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But to draw it into like martial arts, I would say it's like depends on what period of the cycle I'm going through. So like if I have a tournament coming up, the very beginning of that phase will be very kind of humble, very like I don't feel so confident in myself because I'm trying new things and I'm trying to learn. But near the end, when it's about to be competition time, there's a saying, Ben Askren, a multiple time world champ and also wrestling champ in MMA and wrestling, says, when you're learning, you don't know anything. But when you're about to compete, you know everything. So like that's my confidence when I do martial arts. It's like when I'm in the gym and I'm learning, it's like I look at it like I'm a white belt, but like white belt mind, white belt everything. Like I'm thinking like I don't know anything and I'm gonna try and learn everything I can. But when I'm about to compete or I'm going against somebody and it's a competitive environment, I'm thinking in my head it switches and it's like I know everything. It becomes like five level, so it's like a knob. If it starts at like 1 or 2 confidence, it like turns to 5, but just for that short amount of time, the 10 minutes, the 15 minutes. So yeah, it's, I know it's not a simple answer, but that's my answer.
Still a good answer though, man.
Thanks.
Spirituality.
Spirituality, man. I would have to say, if I'm being honest with myself, like a 2.5 maybe. And that only has came more recently. I'd say it's been increasing, like 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. That's because as I've had experience being with a partner, my girlfriend specifically, I should say, who is spiritual, it's been kind of like an eye-opening and kind of like a learning experience. Because before, like I tell people where I'm from, like spirituality was kind of just like work hard, keep going. Like there wasn't something that you called to. You weren't necessarily thinking about like some tradition or going to a church or any of that. Like I wasn't thinking about any of that kind of stuff. But since meeting my girlfriend, it's been more about like for example, Eastern philosophy. I've been thinking a lot more and exploring a lot of Eastern philosophy, a lot of Buddhism, a lot of Zen Buddhism, and meditation with yoga, and meditation just in general for me, for health, self realization, also like they call it introspection. And then there's also visualizing is probably my number one form of like meditating, if you will, if you want to call it that. Because when I can tell people what my plans are of the future, it's usually because I've seen it a couple of times, so it's like it's easy for me to say it. It seems like it's so sure to me, but it's only because I've been seeing it over and over again. So I'm like, okay, I visualized it now, so it seems realistic. So then I can tell people with confidence, okay, this is what I want to do. But before, I mean, it was like I didn't really have like meditation to fall back on. I didn't, and all of that had to change after I got my concussion. It was like I had to take a step back, kind of slow down my life, because before I was 1,700 tabs open on my computer, doing everything at the same time like this, and like my brain was never taking a break.
Yeah.
And I never noticed that before because you're young and you're also just like hungry. But then once you had to actually take a step back because of your health, you start realizing, oh, like I can't do that. I can't stay up for, like, my record playing an MMO in a straight was 34 hours straight. Like I mean, like that's the kind of shit I was doing before. And it was like, looking back, I was like, yeah, I would never do that. Even if you paid me, I wouldn't do that. Like it got to the point to where when you stay up that late, you start seeing stuff, and that's real. That's actually like a clinical thing. You will see stuff as you stay up too long. Because as a human, we're supposed to go to sleep. We're supposed to get sleep. We're supposed to rest. And yeah, so spirituality, I would say, taught me to like take a breath, like, all right, I'm good. Like, okay, let me slow it down. Like, what is the problem here? Let me think about this slowly. Let me maybe take a rest, take a nap, wake up, see if I still think and feel the same way, like thinking more about why I feel a certain way. Like, why am I sad right now? Why am I mad right now? And not just being like, oh, I'm not those things, and trying to just dampen them, trying to be more open to them. So yeah, it's low for me, but I think that's because I'm both critical and I know I'm getting better at it actively. So it feels like it's pretty bad. It's like 2.5 or something.
But it is gradually increasing, though.
I think so, yeah. I would say so, yeah.
It's good to hear that, man. Self-awareness.
Man, that's another one of those things where it's like, I can say I have a 5 of it, but is it really a good thing? Like when people tell you they're super self-aware, I can make the argument that's a bad thing. Like, again, me being super self-aware is being a perfectionist. It's saying I'm never good enough, So it's like, it's always saying that. What I think people who are overly self-aware suffer from, and I'm speaking as somebody I think is overly self-aware, is you can't look at yourself in totality. And I mean, like, in the grand scheme of things, you can't look at yourself. You just look at yourself isolated with all of your like standards and everything, and you just can cut yourself down so easily. And like, as I can do that in my videos, I can do that to myself like really easily. I can cut myself down and be like, I suck at this, like boom, 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 and really, uh, nail into myself. But what I was missing for a long time was just like the perspective of like, well, I can be super critical of myself, super self-aware of myself, but like I also have to acknowledge that my version of aware is different than somebody else's. And it's also my perspective is different than somebody else's perspective. So like where I'm like aware of myself and what I'm doing and what my faults are, somebody else could look at me and be like, well, you're actually not completely aware of yourself, because maybe you'd be aware that you're too aware of yourself, right? And that's what I'm talking about now. It's like I think, too aware of myself, because who is really thinking about all the bad things they do all the time? Like, people who want to like be healthy aren't really thinking about that, right? People
Mm-hmm.
who believe in themselves aren't really always like hitting themselves and beating themselves down. So I think that comes more from honestly like insecurity, and also like a lack of confidence, is being overly self-aware and not being able to say, like, for example, the difference between saying I'm not successful and I'm not successful in this context, right? Because like, have you ever looked at those statistics where you can type in your amount of money you make a year and it'll tell you like globally where you rank yourself?
Mm.
It's shocking to Americans. Like whenever we put our stuff in there, we're like, what? We're actually like pretty high up there. Like even if you don't make that much money, 30,000, 40,000, like you'll be surprised that you make actually a lot of money compared to a lot of people in the world. And so when you see stuff like that, it forces you to get perspective and be like, I can feel like I'm not successful and I'm so self-aware that I'm not successful, but I can also look at someone else who's maybe in a third world country and be like, I didn't have it that bad. Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like I
Oh
knew
yeah.
how to read, right? Like, so I obviously had it much better. At least I had a parent, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you can give yourself a lot of bail once you realize like being self-aware in an isolated sense is kind of like a curse. So yeah, maybe that's coming down now that I'm being less critical of myself.
Patience.
That's, I mean, that's one of my worst. I mean, 1.5, 2.
Why though?
I'm not, I'm not really patient, I think, largely because I'm used to just getting things very quickly. And I'm
Yeah.
also used to my brain always going 100 million miles per hour. So it's like sometimes I have to like literally force myself to be like, all right, slow down. Like, it's not coming yet. Whatever you're waiting on is not coming yet. Don't think about the fact that it's not coming yet, because it's not going to help it come any faster, right? Like if you're just thinking like, oh, I can't wait for this thing to happen. I can't wait for this thing to happen. That's not going to make it come faster. In my experience, it's like you dread it even more, because then you're thinking about it all the time. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, to use competition as an example, I don't think about competition until the day before, like the night before and the day of. So like I just ignore it until it's like I'm suiting up basically, and then I'm like, all right, now I'm thinking about it. And I think that's because I don't want my life to be consumed by thinking about it all the time. So in that sense, it makes sense. But being impatient can be negative when, for example, when you talk to people and sometimes you're just thinking of like basically what they're going to say already. And maybe you're even really good at it. Like I'm pretty good at predicting things. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm talking to somebody and I'm like, okay, they're probably going to say something like this. But it's like, is that really what you're supposed to be doing in a conversation? Is just like expecting what somebody's going to say versus like listening to what somebody's going to say. So forcing yourself to listen makes you more patient. And like I've noticed that myself, like when you tell yourself, all right, let me just not say anything and then just listen first, and then you're kind of like, this is what I'm missing out on. Like, because when you
Yeah.
start by talking and going, then sometimes you miss out on a lot of things. And there's a good quote from Mad Men. It's if you don't like what's being said, like change the conversation. That's one of them. And then there's the other one was dang, no, I'm gonna forget it. It's people tell you who they are in the first couple of seconds of meeting them. You just don't listen. And that's true. It's like a lot of the time people will tell you who they are when you meet them, but they will tell you who they are and you'll just ignore it. And I was having that problem due to my lack of patience, I think. It's like, because when you lack patience, you're a poor listener. And so sometimes I would meet people and I would look back, like, and even like my, looking back at like ex relationships and stuff, like with girlfriends and stuff, you're like, wait, did they catch me off guard, or were they always this way? And you look back and you're like, this friend or this person, they were always that way. I just ignored it, like you
Mm-hmm.
ignore the signs, the red flags, if you will, because you're just not patient. And so you're just talking to somebody, you think you're really connecting. In reality, like, you actually didn't even agree on that thing you just talked about. But but you know what I mean? But you talked past each other, so you didn't even realize that you didn't agree. Like, so yeah, I'm poor at that, but I'm getting better.
So what number?
And I'll give myself a 2. That's after I improved.
Forgiveness.
I'm low on that as well. Like, I mean, maybe like a because I've had to go through some of it, I would say I've got maybe like a 2.5 on forgiveness. I took shit like personally a lot when I was a kid. Like, even my own personal faults, which weren't really a fault to mine. You know, like the statement I like to tell people is like, life isn't fair, because if life was fair, you could create your own character. Like, that's the joke that I make, is like, because it's true. It's like, if you could create your own character, life would be fair, right? You could make it exactly how you wanted it to be. But life isn't fair. You can't create your own character. So like, you don't get a choice if you were born here versus born there. So I mean, in that particular case, like, I don't know if I really forgive myself for a lot of what I went through, just because I took it personally. I was like, well, you know, like, for example, to get deep on you guys, for a long time, it was like, I blamed myself because of my mother. I was like, well, I could have done something different. I could have said something. I could have done something about it. But in hindsight, you're like, I was a child. Like, it's not my job, the job of a child, to take care of an adult. Or, you know, like, you don't understand that when you're in it, because you're just like, oh, I could do something. I can do something. Because I always think that way. Oh, what can I do? What can I do? I'm always trying to think of what I can do. But sometimes you just can't do anything. Like, sometimes you actually just have to kind of just let life pass you by. Sometimes it hits you and socks you, and it takes the wind out of you. And sometimes you just kind of got to get up and, you know, take it on the chin or take it on the stomach, to complete the analogy. But yeah, so I'm not the best at forgiving myself, but I think that's something that I think I'll probably struggle a lot more with later in my life. Is like, as I look back, I'll probably have to really, even, you know, 10-15 years in the future, I'll have to still look back and be like, okay, am I still holding myself accountable for these things? Like, have I actually forgiven myself yet? Because it can feel like you've forgiven yourself, but then sometimes it comes back and you're like, no, I still feel this way a little bit. So yeah, maybe like a 2 or something like that.
Courage.
Man, courage is one of those things where it's like hard to describe for me. Like, it's I think, honestly, I think a lot of people are courageous. So I guess it's hard for me to rate myself, because I'm trying to think like what someone else would rate themselves, you know, like, versus like what I would rate myself. Like, it being courageous, like, I know people in my family who arguably to me have been way more courageous than I have. Like, you know, my aunt, for example, came to Houston, had a kid early on. The dad was not around. He pretty much was abandoning the kid. She raised him. She also was going to school and working at the same time. She got a degree. She was working throughout the entire process. Like, it took her like 10 years to finish her degree, because she was going through all of that stuff, just, you know, nonstop. But she actually got her degree. She became a teacher, you know, in her 30s. And so, like, that's late for some people, right, to start becoming a teacher. And so, like, for me, somebody like that who had to fight through all of that, that's courageous. So when I look at myself, I'm more like, I mean, compared to that, I feel like I'm more like a 3 or something. You know, if that's a 5, I'm like a 3, because that to me took a lot to be like, not only am I going to raise my kid, I'm also not going to give up on my dreams. And I feel like, me personally, maybe I'd give up on my dreams if I had a kid to raise, you know, like, I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows until you have a kid. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's a really like meta answer, really technical answer, but I'd say I'm looking at people in my family and I'm like, they're a lot more courageous than I am. So I would say that they're a 5. I'm more like a 3.
All right, last one. Luck.
I mean, there's a saying in my family, which is my dad and I parrot it the most, that we're never lucky. So I'm gonna say like a 1.5, man. My luck has been pretty poor. Like I have a funny story actually to kind of explain this my thought process. So right after I won my tournament in Overwatch and I was starting to really get into the game professionally, was right when I got my concussion. So I was like, oh wow, I'm so lucky, right? Like, obviously not lucky. But looking back, whenever I was playing Guild Wars 2, I was sponsored by Team Curse, which at the time was a big organization. No longer really exists anymore. I don't think they exist anymore.
Was it the one that transferred to Team Liquid? Like they turned into Team Liquid?
Yes, I'm pretty sure Team Curse was acquired by Team Liquid and merged together because Liquid 112 actually was the guy who recruited me. So Liquid 112, for those who follow the scene, is now the big wig at Team Liquid. So it was actually like I emailed him out of the blue and was like, "Are you guys going to make an Overwatch? Sorry, a Guild Wars 2 team?" And he was like, "Well, I mean, send me some footage. Like, are you trying to like apply basically?" And I was like I couldn't imagine that would actually work. Just reaching out to the guy worked. And so after going through that process, getting sponsored, being the first sponsored team in America in Guild Wars 2, the game basically had no support for its esports for at least like a year or two. So it was like I put a year or two of my life into this, and then it was kind of like all the air came out of the balloon. So I would say my luck's been pretty poor, but there's also a really good saying to not make people want to feel sorry for me, because I don't want pity. It's more that when it comes to luck is when skill meets kind of like preparation, right? So it's like if you're just really prepared, then you can seem lucky, right? You seem pretty lucky because you've already seen the different avenues that are going to be, or sorry, I should say, you're going to see the different obstacles that are coming at you, so you can kind of preemptively dodge them. So people are thinking like, wow, this guy's so lucky, he can just move around. Whereas it's more like, nah, I just been through so much of the shit that like I see it coming already. Like on YouTube, you know, people will tell me, oh, within 2 years you did 160,000 subs. Like that's a lot. And I'm like, it is a lot, but it's also, I spent 9 more years trying to do YouTube before that and failing over and over again. So it's like, it's not like I just started and, oh wow, it worked. It's like awesome.
Yeah.
It's like I was watching Total Biscuit, you know, Joseph Anderson. Like I was watching other people, Reykjavik. I was studying their stuff and being like, I can do that, you know, I can do something like that. So yeah, I haven't really been lucky, but I haven't needed luck. So
That's a good answer, man. All right, so character creation. You said your attributes. Now you're off to your main quest, my friend. So what is your main quest?
It's shifted a lot, and it's gonna sound like pretty. I think it sounds kind of PC to say, but it's like what started as just like I want to make cool videos and videos I enjoy quickly became, not only do I want to make videos that I enjoy, I want to make videos that people can learn from. Because when I first started my series, as much as I could say I started it by trying to just be educational, that's not how it started. It was more of like, almost like I said in my Galaxies video, it was kind of like coming to grips with my own emotions and my own tale with Galaxies as well. It felt like therapeutic in a way. Like I got to go back through my experience of playing the game and kind of like put the game to rest, if that makes sense. Like like almost like be like that was a part of the chapter in my life, but now I'm kind of moved on to some extent. So it gave me some level of closure. But so it started like just kind of like, oh, I just want to do this about games I played a lot. But then it kind of became a thing. I was like, well, nobody else is doing this. And when you notice nobody else is doing something that's like beneficial, I kind of realized like there's a need, there's a desire, people wanted that. There was a demand. And I was looking at YouTube and realizing like MMOs have obviously waned in popularity. They're not nearly as popular as they were at one point. And a big part of that is because they don't have popular YouTubers. So I was like, well, a big part of the problem is that there needs to be better YouTubers. So I was like, if I can start to do this, then maybe I can also help MMOs at large. And so it started as just being like, I'm just going to do this thing that I find fun. And then it became, I'm going to do this thing I find fun that other people find fun. Then it was like, I also want to teach people. And then it kind of became now, for example, I've done consulting work with different companies, and now it's a lot more, I just want to help the space, period. Like I want MMOs as a genre to improve and get better. And I want gaming as a whole to improve. So like whether that means, you know, going to a convention, you know, I love doing that. Whether that means going to arcades, I love arcades, like whether it's PC cafes, like esports, you know, educational content, whether it's like streaming, like I support all of it because I want gaming as a whole to grow. And I think it's because my big long-term goal is for people to get the same level of enjoyment and utility out of video games that I did. Because for me, you know, I tell people that martial arts and video games, those things saved my life. So without those things, I don't know where I would be, because I spent so much of my life doing those things. I can't imagine what else I would have been doing. And I mean, that's the thing, is just like when I was in those teenage years, that's when I could have gotten in the most trouble, and that's when I was playing the most games. So it's like games kept me out of trouble, you know. Like I know people where I'm from who died, who robbed people, who were, you know, sent to jail, people who got pregnant, like girls who got pregnant in middle school. Like that was like my life growing up. And so I didn't want that to be my future. Of course, I was always thinking like, I want to do something more, like I want to do something better than this, you know. I don't want to be stuck here, kind of thing. And so I think finding a way to teach people the beauty that is gaming, you know, and how helpful it can also be. It's not just like, you know, some people have said recently, a way to teach you how to kill people or whatever. Like it's nothing about that. It's not like, you know, GTA isn't going to make you rob the liquor store. Like like none of that stuff's really going to happen, but it is going to teach you that if you are frustrated, or you had a bad day at work, or you were bored, or you're not sure what to do, if you just load up a video game, you can find something to do. You know, it's like it forces you to be active. And growing up, TV, I hated TV because I would watch it and I'm like, my family, my parents watch this stuff and it's so passive. And they would tell me, hey, you play too much video games. In my head, I'm thinking, but I'm active the whole time.
Yeah.
I'm not just sitting there watching, like, you know, my brain's like kind of slowly melting away.
Yeah.
I have to play the whole time. And if you don't, you're going to get killed, especially in an online game. So it's like, I think that video games really like can be educational and can be therapeutic for people. In fact, if you look at older people, what they'll tell them, and I've seen this happen, is doctors will prescribe them, you know, like CBD, THC, and tell them play games, like play video games. Like if you want to keep your cognitive abilities going, do something medical, but also play games. Like, and playing games is a really good way to keep your mind from deteriorating, from having things like Alzheimer's, you know, having things like dementia. Like video games have been linked to help with things like that. So it's like there's actually medical benefits, psychological benefits, mental benefits.
Yeah.
Maybe the physical stuff is only if you're playing like Just Dance or Beat Saber or, you know, Dance Dance Revolution, because those games are hard on your body and you will lose some calories playing those. But
Yep.
I think that's kind of one of my main goals, is trying to unite as many passionate people with gaming as possible, and also teach people about the process of what it takes to make some of these games. Like, for example, these online games, which, you know, it's so easy to just say, oh, the thing I hated about this game, that's why the game didn't do well. It's really easy to say that, but there's no evidence really. Like, you actually have to find, like, is that actually something that kept people from playing the game? Or was it just me? And when you start to look at games as more of like not just your opinion of something, then you start to realize, well, these things can actually have flaws. You can see the patterns, right? Like, this game has this problem, but now I've done, you know, 60 or 50 Death of a Games. I can see like some of these games have literally the same problems. And it's like, it's not so unique once you take it away from it's a different game, it's a different team. When you look at it more in a broad perspective, you're like, actually, they made the same mistakes. They went too fast. They launched early. Like, and so for me, it's about, now I would say, being an educator. And so the same thing actually applies to martial arts. My goal is to eventually be a black belt. My goal is to eventually teach people, to help people learn that they can defend themselves, that they can be confident in themselves, that they can feel good about themselves. And I feel like gaming and martial arts together are a perfect marriage in that sense. And it's funny because jiu-jitsu is actually considered probably the most nerdy of martial arts. And it's because it's one of the harder ones to do intellectually. It takes a lot of knowledge. It takes a lot of knowing how to react in the right moment. And it's kind of, I'm not going to say it's not about being athletic. That helps, but it's less about being athletic than maybe Muay Thai, right? Or karate is all about being athletic and fast and quick and moving. If someone who can do karate and has done it for a long time, you know, they're very athletic, but can they necessarily take the pressure, right, that someone that does jiu-jitsu can? Or can they think their way out of a situation versus like, what do you do when you get tired, right? Or like jiu-jitsu people have a game plan for when they get tired because their art doesn't require them to use that much energy. So it's more intellectual, which I think makes gaming and BJJ kind of really closely knit. And if you hear Joe Rogan or watch Joe Rogan at all, he talks about it. He calls jiu-jitsu it's a chess with dire physical consequences. But then he also says that the biggest killers at jiu-jitsu are basically nerd killers, he calls them. And he describes a nerd killer as basically just a nerd, like a guy who loves video games, a guy who studies like hardcore. He's a nerd. They get really good at jujitsu because it's one of those things where when you're smart, it's something you can get good at. So I just want to show the other nerds basically that you don't have to feel helpless. You don't have to just not do anything whenever. I was watching a video the other day, and you know how guys will throw their controllers when they're playing like a shooter or like a fighting game,
range.
especially. Yeah, like so this one was like when they're at tournaments though, and people will like throw their controller and be like pissed off, and I'm looking at all the nerds around them, and they're not saying anything. Nobody's even doing anything, and I'm like, okay, if I was there, I'd be like, hey buddy, you need to get out of here. You're gonna hurt somebody. Get all that rage and take that somewhere else, because like one thing to have competition, it's another thing to be like throwing your shit and like raging out and stuff like that. So it's like when I see that, it makes me think like these nerds need some martial arts, all right? Because I could tell you if they did at least 1 or 2 classes, they might have been a little bit confident to be like, hey man, even as a group, there's multiple of you, so it's not just you against one guy. You can just say as a group, hey, we don't want you to come here, you know, like you're gonna like endanger people. There's kids here, you know, like there's old women here, like, you know, what are you doing exactly?
Yeah, that's the key fact. That's a good key factor that you brought up. What I learned with martial arts is that it definitely brought up my confidence, and like you said, I definitely recommend everybody taking at least be open-minded to go to a couple classes and see if you like it or not, and which I'm pretty sure y'all will like it.
Something is better than nothing. Like even if you just did a couple of classes in a year, like at least you'd have an idea of like, okay, well at least I know like this little move I can do in case of a bad situation.
Of course. Well, that's your main quest. So with every main quest, there's always some side quests. So what are some side quests that you're working on?
I would say for side quests, so far it's been doing like D&D, role playing, trying to do things that are like leaving my comfort zone. I would say role play was always one of those things when I was younger. Watching people play D&D, I was like, I don't know, that might be the next level of nerd. That's how I looked at it. I was like, that's like nerd to the, you know, next level. I was like, I don't know if I can quite do that. But then of course, role playing online, it wasn't that much of a jump for me to do it in person. It was just more getting past the stigma. Like once you're past the stigma, you're like, oh, this is even cooler in person, because like I can really pretend I'm somebody else. I could even dress up like I'm somebody else. So I'd say like that's one of my side quests. One of my short-term goals is to just get better at that. Probably get better at singing as well. I like to work on my voice a little bit.
Okay.
That helps me as a commentator, as somebody who obviously gets paid to talk. So like, you know, anytime I can work on my breathing or work on my vocal projection or work on, you know, my ability to hold a note or something like that, those are some short-term goals of mine. Other things I guess would be kind of like eating more food, because I'm one of those people where I don't eat enough, and it's hard for some people to understand what that means. But when you're burning like as many calories as I burn, like you have to eat even more. So like instead of eating like 2,000, 3,000 calories like most, I have to eat even more food in order to maintain my body weight, basically. So
yeah, being 6'5" too, it's a lot of maintenance.
It is, and it's honestly, I stay around 180, which is like 8% body fat at the moment. But I was higher before when I wasn't intermittent fasting. But now that I fast, even harder to fit the food in, because you have a shorter window. So now it's like I lost a lot of fat, a lot of, in my opinion, like the bad fat. But if I wanted to gain more weight, I'd have to eat even more. So right now I'm just focused on maintaining. But I don't know, maybe someday I'll care more about seeing what my true weight is. You know, like if I could actually eat every day, like would my weight go up? Would it kind of stay back down? Am I not eating enough? Or, you know, like, so that's kind of my short-term goals, are a lot of health related and food related stuff.
Any other side quests?
No, I think that's it right now.
Cool. All right, so you got the end of your main quest. You finished off your side quests. You reach your final boss. So what is the final boss you wish to conquer?
I probably would say it'd be, for me, it's a broad term, but I'd say freedom. And freedom for me means like financial freedom. It means freedom of your mind, your spirit, freedom to apply yourself to whatever you think is, you know, the best place for you to apply yourself. And a lot of the struggles I go through, especially building, you know, a channel, building a production studio, is like not having resources. You know, like I can't get a loan from, whatever place. Like, I don't have that kind of like power to have people just give me money, to have my parents or people in my family just give me like a bunch of money and be like, all right, like go do a business or something like that. Like, I can't just, I don't have that shortcut. So
Mm-hmm.
like for me, it's a lot of like, I have to take my time and slowly build up my resources, slowly build up my channel to the point to where I can slowly make acquisitions. I can hire other people. I can get a workspace. I can get a camera, for example, so my quality doesn't look like this, so it's so dark.
Mm-hmm. Just get
Things
a
like
light.
that. Well, the light does help a lot, and honestly,
Yeah.
that one back there just needs a new bulb. I think, but I hope it's not broken otherwise, because it fell over and broke recently, and so I don't know if it's the light itself
Pretty
or
sure
if
it's a
it's
light
just
bulb. They're pretty sensitive. Studio lights are
okay.
pretty sensitive.
Okay. Well, then I'm hoping that it's just I can replace it and that's it. But like for me, like little stuff like that actually it matters, because I think like, oh man, that's another,
Mm-hmm.
$20, like whatever I end up spending. It's like every little cost piles up and it adds up. So I would say my main goal is just the freedom to be able to, make decisions that aren't just restricted by cost, and restricted by like my resources. So I want to help people, but you can't help people if you don't have money to help yourself, You can't
Correct.
help people if you don't have like a infrastructure to help yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
I can say I want to help as many people as possible, but if I can't reach them, right? Like then it doesn't matter. If I can't connect with them, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So, say you conquer your final boss and it hits game over. What is the impact or legacy you wish to leave when somebody opens up your save file?
I would definitely hope it would be MMOs are very personal to me. I would hope that it would be seen as me pioneering maybe even just popular thoughts, even if it's just like an idea, right? Like, not to say I have to make the game myself, it has to be my game that makes it. But if I can, at least in some part, people can look back and say, for example, like someone I look back on, who's still around, so his save file is not, completely yeah, I hadn't had to pick it up off the ground or anything yet. The guy's still around, but Richard Bartle, the guy who came up with the different Bartle types. I don't know if you've ever heard of those. Achiever, killer. Like, it's a pretty interesting concept. He came up with that a long time ago. PhD in like AI or something like that. So really smart guy. He is the originator of the term and the game, the MUD. So the multi-user dungeon, which is like the first kind of game that happened on the PC. Those are like a text-based game. So once they were text-based games, text-based online games, and then they became multiplayer online games, and they became massive multiplayer online games. So in the same way that I remember that guy as a pioneer and I see his contributions, I want someone to be able to look at me and be able to see that kind of similar thing, to be like, oh, this guy really helped push the envelope. He helped with education. He helped made it more accessible, because a lot of the pioneers of the online world weren't really worried about making it accessible because they were the first. When you're the first, it's kind of hard to worry about like, I want everyone to experience this, when you just want even just a little bit of people to experience it. So while he was focused on the little bit of people, I feel like I'm a lot more focused on a lot of people, and I'm trying to get as many people as possible to be able to be either inspired by MMOs. And speaking of like a main quest of that, actually an aspect of that that's related to my main quest, is MMOs are another aspect that can teach people social interaction. They can teach people how to make friends. They can teach people how to join a guild or how to join a group, how to help other people, how to receive help, how to be thankful. Like, there's so many social things that an MMO can teach you. So for me, it's like, if my legacy is at least showing as many people about that capability as possible, that's good enough for me.
All right, last question, man. Where can people find you?
So my YouTube channel is youtube.com/c/nerdslayer gaming, or you can just look up Nerdslayer, or you can just look up Death of a Game if you want to go see my main series that I produce about 2 a month or so. You can also find me on twitch.tv/nerdslayer with 3 R's. My voice is running out apparently, because I did a stream yesterday, so for like 5 hours, so my voice is totally checked out. So Nerdslayer, that's 3 R's on twitch.tv. You can also go to Twitter, Nerdslayer G, and then what else do I have? Oh, Instagram, Justin G Time, EE time. So my last name with EE time, basically, just in G time. You know, it's a pun. And then what else? Discord. You can come join my Discord. It's www.discord.gg/nerdslayer. And that's it. Yeah, those are my main outlets.
All right, again, man, Nerd Slayer, thank you so much for coming through, sharing your story, sharing your save file, man. Much love, much appreciation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And honestly, I'm glad that you took the time out of your day to ask me some questions, because speaking of being self-reflective, sometimes when other people are asking you questions, you learn more about yourself, than you do otherwise, because I'm not going to ask myself those questions, right? Because in my head, I'm thinking I already know these things. But when somebody else asks you and you have to actually tell somebody and like formulate the thoughts, you're kind of like, I didn't even, you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, you're welcome, man. You're welcome. That's the whole goal for this, is that I noticed that, everybody knows who the UFC stars are. Everybody knows who these pro football players are, but nobody really knows like the gamers. And especially with esports coming up, it's starting to get more popular, and I wish to have this platform for people like you to share your story. So thank you again.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Awesome. Yeah.
For having me.
Guys, I mean, I don't know. What more can you say? This man, Nerd Slayer, his brand story goes by that name. He is a hardcore nerd, which is fine, guys. You could be a nerd. It's cool. Being a nerd is fun. You could be a nerd, but still be a badass at the same time. He's a good example of that. Not only be physically strong, but be mentally strong, to build the confidence within yourself to handle certain situations. And not only that, to find yourself. Because as people some know, like him and I would know, we have experience in martial arts, is that you definitely find yourself physically. And how I said earlier is that you don't really know how strong you are until you have to be strong. And Nerd Slayer is a perfect example of that, of him sharing his character creation. So with that being said, gamers, episode 13, if you made it this far, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to his save file. Again, my name's Gold Lion. Stay happy, stay healthy, and most of all, gamers, stay golden.